Out in the warm-up room, they wait, but on stage, Dimas, this is the moment. If he doesn't lift this, he's out of these Olympic Games.
Sydney, 2000. Dimas's third Olympic Games, where he was considered a favorite for a third gold medal. Yet after 2 failed snatches, it looks as though the Lion of Haimara is about to lose the chance for even a total, let alone a medal. In a situation like this, with the pressure of your own greatness bearing down on you, our narratives about sport like to chalk up success or failure to the presence of heart or grit. Yet while those surely play a role, the reality is far more mundane. It all comes down to training and preparation.
And he's got it at last. For relief, he looks around as to say, what was I doing before?
As Dimas mentioned several times during our conversations, he was an athlete who always appreciated and wanted the seriousness of training. When it came time for the clean and jerk in Sydney, he shared this anecdote about his preparation.
In Sydney, I needed 215 kilos in the clean and jerk for the gold medal. So I went to the platform certain that I could do this weight. But when I brought the bar to my shoulders, I felt like I was being choked. With difficulty, I was able to take a breath. But then I thought to myself, what is this? How heavy is this? I had done this exact weight in training before the competition at least 50 or even 60 times. So I told myself that I needed this weight, that I would do this weight, and I did it. I was confident because I had done this weight so many times before in training.
Just as important, Dimas had, in his words, the right training at the right time. As with so many other factors of Dimas's rise to weightlifting glory, the story involves a fortuitous combination of luck, circumstance, and preparation. It starts, as mentioned last time, in Albania. That was where Dimas spent the first decade or so training, from the late 1970s through the 1980s, and where he built his base as an athlete.
From the age of 10 to 17, my training involved a lot of repetitions, and it was the Chinese and Russian style of programming. Training consisted of several repetitions up to around 80% of your maximum, rather than 100%. This continued until I was 17 or 18 years old. The idea here was to build your base as an athlete. The basis of athletics is like constructing a building. You need a solid foundation, and for a weightlifter, a good foundation consists of many repetitions.
Let's take a moment here to clarify some shorthand that Dimas is using. To oversimplify things a lot, there are basically 2 dominant approaches to training. The one Dimas is referring to here is often called Russian-style training, and has been developed and refined over decades of research in the second half of the 20th century. Basically, this involves a wide range of exercises in addition to the classic lifts, so things like pulls, variations of the lifts, and supplementary work. Lots of repetitions in the 60 to 80% range, with variety in the reps and weights, and varying levels of intensity during the training cycle through the manipulation of reps, weight, and volume. In short, periodization. This would involve a preparatory period, a pre-competitive period, and a competitive period, where the athlete would ultimately be in peak condition for competition day. In general, this type of training is called the Russian or Soviet approach, as it was pioneered and written about by Soviet scientists. Figures like Robert Roman and Alexei Medvedev, coaches of the national team in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, were researchers and approached weightlifting with a scientific eye. Their work was the foundation for hundreds, if not thousands, of world-class athletes. The Soviet approach was how Dimas and his fellow Albanians were brought up in the sport. This changed when Dimas moved from Albania to Greece in 1991, although the transition wasn't as simple as going from one national federation to another.
After I was 18, I moved from Albania to Greece. I was lucky to come to a very good club in Greece, the Athletic Club of Nia Smyrni Milan, and it was in a suburb of Athens. It wasn't a big club with a lot of funding, but it had people who loved sports. When I first arrived, everyone welcomed me warmly, as though we were family. Initially, I came with just my brother, but later the club helped us bring our parents and find work and housing for them too. Thanks to being involved with sports, I learned to be organized in my daily life. So in immigration too, we were organized and structured. And this is how I wanted it, for things to be neat and convenient.
When Dimas and his brother moved to Greece, they were just two of thousands of Albanian immigrants entering the country in the early 1990s. To get a sense of why this was happening, and why leaving his homeland might have seemed like a good move at the time, it's helpful to review a little bit of Albanian modern history. In the last segment, Dimas talked about how harsh the regime was, how it was based in fear and propaganda, and how people who spoke out risked disappearing altogether. This is not hyperbole. From the mid-1940s to 1990, Albania had one of the toughest dictatorships in the communist bloc. The dictator, Enver Hoxha, ruled from 1944 until his death in 1985. While the country saw some significant advances in industrialization, education, and health, it came at the expense of widespread oppression and the violation of basic human and political rights. Furthermore, through the 1960s and 70s, Albania cut off contact with most of the world, including other communist countries, as a result of crazy xenophobia. A tangible legacy of this isolation and fear is the presence of hundreds of thousands of concrete bunkers built during Enver Hoxha's reign, constructed in preparation for a feared attack by either Soviet or NATO forces. These bunkers, over 700,000 of them according to some sources, still dot nearly every part of the Albanian landscape. By 1990, the last year Dimas would compete for Albania, the country was just starting to see the unrest that would ultimately lead to the fall of the communist regime. Initially, it seemed like Albania would remain immune to the revolutions taking place elsewhere in the Eastern Bloc. In fact, many Albanians didn't even know that the Berlin Wall had fallen in 1989, so isolated were they. But by spring 1990, there were anti-communist demonstrations taking place for the first time in 50 years. By early 1991, people were able to cross the border into neighboring countries, although the government denied that it was officially open. Dimas, along with thousands of others, thus found his way to Greece.
Τυχεροί τότε, γιατί ανοίξαν τα σύνορα για κάποια παιδιά όπως εγώ.
At that time, when I moved to Greece, we were lucky that the borders had been open for people like myself. Valerios Leonidis from Russia, Leonidas Sabanis, Victor Mitru, and Leonidas Kokas were all from Albania, and they had Greek roots and wanted to come to Greece. We had this opportunity, and we were the right people at the right time. So this group, this sort of dream team was formed, and it was all lifters who had been training since a very, very young age. My first coach in Greece, although he was a very good person, his knowledge of weightlifting was just insufficient for me. In general, the club had insufficient knowledge when it came to weightlifting. As I mentioned earlier, my brother was by my side during this entire time. He was my trainer for that first year. He was my coach, and he made sure to help develop me technically, since the coach I was with just wasn't able to help in these areas. But luckily, after a short time, I received a Greek passport and the authorization from the Albanian state to compete with Greece, since I had been a child of an ethnic minority in Albania. So I started competing with Greece and very quickly became a part of the national team, which is where I met Christos Iakovou, the coach of the Greek national team.
Παιδί της μειονότητας μπορώ να αγωνιστώ με την Ελλάδα, δώσαν την άδεια για οι Αλβανοί.
The program here in Greece was purely Bulgarian. That is warming up with doubles up to around 60%, and then doing single repetitions to 100% of your daily best. This is just a different way of approaching training completely. But without my previous base, I think I would have just been injured in the system. I couldn't stand up to that stress.
Αλλά αν δεν είχα τις βάσεις της προηγούμενης προπόνησης, νομίζω ότι θα είχα τραυματιστεί πολλές φορές. Δεν θα άντεχα σε όλη αυτή την πίεση.
Here, Dimas is referring to the other major approach to training, the so-called Bulgarian system. Few things in weightlifting inspire so much heated debate as the Bulgarian program, what it is, how it was used, and whether it actually works. This isn't the place to get into those arguments, but here are the basic details. Compared to the Russian or Soviet approach, the Bulgarian system involves much fewer exercises, typically only snatches, clean and jerks, and squats, done for singles up to a daily maximum. This type of training is most often associated with Ivan Abadjiev, who coached the Bulgarian national team to unprecedented success in the 1970s, 80s, and late 90s. In his words, when he first started as the country's national coach, they were using about 20 exercises. During his tenure, he cut that down to about 5. Instead of counting up the attempts at lower percentages, 70 and 80% for example, like the Russians, he only focused on the maximum attempts, which he felt were the only ones that were important for improving results. Debates over comparative effectiveness aside, it's hard to argue with the success of the Bulgarian team. Among the many superstars to come out of this system, none is more famous or celebrated than the great Naim Suleymanoglu, a Turkish lifter who was originally from Bulgaria. Suleymanoglu's 500-point Sinclair total, based on a formula used to compare lifters across weight classes, is still the highest of all time. Yet this sort of training is not for those without an iron constitution.
Ξεκινούσαμε μετά το πρωινό, ξεκινούσαμε κατευθείαν, η πρώτη άσκηση που κάναμε ήταν πόδια.
Training started right after breakfast. We would start with back squats, then do snatch, clean and jerk, then front squat. This was the morning session alone. We ate lunch around 1 p.m., rested till about 4, and then at 4 began the afternoon training session. We would snatch, clean and jerk, and squat, and then ate dinner around 7:30 to 8. From 8 to 9:30, we trained again, either snatches or clean and jerks, plus more back squats, so 2 more exercises at the end of the day.
Κάναμε ξανά ή αρασέ τη μία μέρα, πολλές την άλλη μέρα και πόδια. Άλλες 2 ασκήσεις δηλαδή μετά το φαγητό.
Let's go over that one more time.
Back squats. Back squats first. Snatch, clean and jerk, and front squats. Snatch, clean and jerk, front squats. After one day we have snatch and back squats. Second day we have clean and jerk and back squats. We change one day snatch, one day in the third training, third session. 2 more exercises. We do 1 day snatch, 1 day clean and jerk, and back squats.
So 3 sessions a day?
Yes, 3 days. Every day, but Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we do 100%. 100%. Next day, we do 85% from the day before. Yeah. Ήταν δύσκολη η συνεργασία στην αρχή, πολύ δύσκολη.
This type of training was difficult at the beginning. When I say difficult, it was very difficult. Because for an athlete who is accustomed to another program, it's hard to suddenly switch to something new, especially when you've been raised with a completely different program. You have to adjust to these changes very gradually. Yakovu and I would argue all the time. We really didn't have a good relationship in the beginning. But then we had a very productive discussion, and we agreed that I would follow his program, but with some accessory exercises for me. So I asked for more repetitions up to 70%, and I asked for a little more time to adjust to transitioning completely from one program to another. I think he finally understood that it was a mistake to expect so sudden of a change from one day to the next. So he gave me about a year or more to fully acclimate myself to the new program.
Regularly going to maximal weights is a significant stressor, and in our conversations, Dimas was keen to emphasize the seriousness of the training environment and the intensity of this training.
Την ώρα της προπόνησης μπαίναμε μέσα, σβήναμε κινητά, δεν είχαμε λόγια πολλά, υπήρχε ησυχία στο γυμναστήριο.
When it was time to train, we were generally quiet and focused. We turned our phones off, stopped talking, and usually it was very quiet. Not for every lift, but for the heavy attempts, we stayed silent. Personally, I always wanted silence. Sometimes if people started talking when I entered, the coach would say, "Wait a minute, quiet. We're getting to a heavy attempt now." And we'd all respect each other and watch these heavy attempts. Weightlifting is a sport that requires concentration and silence. Furthermore, when I watched Kaki make a good lift, it would make me want to do the same. It's a way of bringing out the athlete's ego in these moments.
Όταν έβλεπα τον Κάχη να κάνει ένα ρεκόρ στην προπόνηση, να κάνει ένα καλό κιλό, ήθελα και εγώ να κάνω ένα καλό κιλό. Μου έμπαινε το μικρόβιο. Είναι ο αθλητής, είναι ο εγωισμός που μπαίνει μέσα σου εκείνη τη στιγμή. Ο κάθε αθλητής θέλει να κάνει ό,τι κάνει και ο άλλος.
The Kaki Dimas refers to here is the famous Kaki Kakiashvili, another transplant from abroad who formed part of the Greek Dream Team and about whom we'll talk more next time. What's important here is to appreciate just how intense training can be in some countries. Listen to how Norik Vardanian describes his time training in Armenia.
It was like Survivor. We would start out with like 20, 25 guys. Next training camp you go to, it's like 20. Like, oh, where are the other guys? We would call them and like, oh, you guys are at training camp? Oh, I didn't get the call, you know? So it's like 2 days before the training camp, you get the call like, hey, 2 days, be up there, we'll see you. And you just go, and every time it was less and less and less and less until it was our 8 guys plus 1 alternate. It was real intense. You got to come in well prepared every day. It's kind of like fighting for your life, you know? You know if you don't make the next training camp, there goes your stipend, there goes everything. No chance to make the European team, the world team, or whatever team it may be at that time. And that was the difference, you know? That was a big difference. People legit train for their lives. Like, people would dive under weights that I'm like, dude, you have no business going under that, you know? But that's how it was. That's how it was over there.
This fighting for one's livelihood is a common factor in countries with successful weightlifting programs. For weightlifters like Dimas in Greece or Norik in Armenia, training was a full-time job. But despite the hardships, Dimas also stressed that this program, the Bulgarian approach, was what worked for him, and ultimately what made him a champion.
I really liked the Bulgarian program, and I feel it suited me very well. But I also had the benefit of years of repetition as a base underneath my belt. Consider this. To fully assimilate and feel good on this program, it took me almost 4 years, from 1991 to about 1995. Only then did I feel the program worked well for me and that it was the right one. That's when I started to feel good and truly believe in it. If we compare the two programs, one being the Russian and Chinese program first, it's good until a specific age. This is a good way to build up an athlete, but to be the highest level, I think the second program, the Bulgarian method, was much better. I think I needed that program, and I was lucky because I had the right system at the right time. One country trained me in one method, and the other country applying another training method. The change made me a better athlete.
Of course, it was more than just a change in scenery or training program that contributed to Dimas's outstanding success. Among the many variables, one of the most important, and one he stressed, was the group of athletes he trained with during this time. This was the famed Dream Team that rose to prominence in the mid-1990s, and about which we'll learn more next time.